Hi guys, it's Elizabeth again here at the Focus Community Strategies FCS Open House in historic South Atlanta. I was wrong earlier, so what's happening now is everybody's finished up dinner and then they're going to go in for the first part of the open house, which is all about hearing from our founder, Bob Lupton stories. And I'm saying I'm just a fan of FCS. I'm here so that the staff can focus on doing their job. But tonight, if you haven't gotten a chance to hear Bob Lupton speak before, he started FCS 40 years ago, not here in historic South Atlanta, but somewhere else. We've been in historic South Atlanta for about 20 years. But he still has so much wisdom, and he has shaped kind of the thought process of FCS. So the open house always kicks off with getting to hear his stories, hear some of his insights, and let Shawn, who is the director of training and consulting, kind of pick his brain in like a fireside chat kind of way. So let me turn the camera. We're gonna go in. Everyone's still kind of settling down, and then we're gonna get to hear Bob. But while I'm doing that, I'd love to hear if any of you have heard Bob Lupton. I'd love to hear from you in a comment. What was your first impression, or what's something you've learned from his writings? Those would be wonderful things for us to hear. So you can mull on that and write your little comment while I turn around the camera and get us inside. We'd love to hear also if you've ever been to an open house before. It's always great to know what your experience was, what you learned, even if it was like 5 years ago. It's really great to know like how all the seeds that were planted here have started to grow. Okay, so here we are. I caught Jim again. He said he wasn't going to be on camera, but there he is. That's the president of FCS, Jim Weiner, and the program manager of the Lupton Center, Monica Evans. Jim, I caught you. I told the camera. I said I caught him. You know, what's the fun of having a camera in your hand if you can't embarrass a few people? Okay, so as you can see, there is Donnell and Shawn. They're getting ready. Bob will sit in one of these lovely chairs, and the only thing I can assume is that the paper that Shawn's twirling in his hand is a list of questions. Okay, we're gonna have a little bit of a sneak peek sighting. To my right is FCS board member Chris Gray. He's trying to stay very low key, just mill around with all the other participants, but here he is. He has been part of FCS's story for a long time, and he's also going to be running in the upcoming 5K. So if you are looking for a runner to support in about a month, Chris might be your guy. But to be honest, both Shawn and Donnell are also running in the 5K. So if you're thinking about sponsoring a runner and helping FCS meet its $10,000 goal in October, now would be a good chance to figure out who you want to support as a runner. Let's see, who else can I show you while we're waiting for things to get started? There's Pamela Stringfield. She's the neighborhood engagement coordinator. She lives close by in Peoplestown, but has known FCS for quite some time. So as the neighborhood engagement coordinator, she helps start new partnerships. Oh, and that's Donnell shushing us, so let me go. All right, here we go. Bye.
Everybody enjoy food tonight? Yeah. So good. How many lost the thought that you were eating vegan food tonight?
I did. I couldn't tell it was vegan.
Sliders. I'm like, my wife is from the islands. Her family's from the islands, and so jackfruit is something that they absolutely love and swear by. And when I was told after eating like 6 of them, it was jackfruit. I'm like, I need to go eat 6 more because I don't even believe this stuff is crazy. That it was amazing, but then also there was also something in that lemonade, so it was probably a combination too. I need to keep trying it to figure out which one, the drink and the sliders, right? So what for us, that it was an example of wanting to partner with local restaurateurs, entrepreneurs. I think we began with the example of what you love about your city, about your place. Oftentimes we forget that there are people with great potential, great plan, great product that already exists in the place, right? We often say, like, we're not showing up bringing God with us. God was already at work in those places, in those people, right? We're joining with, coming alongside. And this is a great example. Zach Wallace is his name, coming alongside of him. They created the restaurant out of wanting to respond to health issues for them, but also wanted to create a really, really good product. They've been really extremely successful in kind of media, rap world, and this pivot, hard pivot, and has become extremely successful in this product that it would be said, like our grocery store, when you look on the shelves, those products probably aren't going to be sold with those type of people. Those type of people don't eat that kind of food, right? And dispelling myths, mythbusters, right? I'm all about, those are my best friends. Like, what have you conjured up in brain for generations? I want to go after that, right? And dispel those myths, right? And I think doing so in a way that I remember dignity and identity, right? That values those things in people is extremely important to us. So we are advocates, proponents for buying, serving culture. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So speaking of that, where we got to that kind of thought process from, we get to spend tonight with our founder, who is alive and well and still has faculties, right? Can you hear me? To a degree. We are grateful and honored that we get to have a founder. You heard us talking about earlier outside of his presence, but in his presence, that we have a founder who is able to pass the baton well and allow us to continue running race, standing on his shoulders, but then propelling us forward. That doesn't happen often, right? And most people hold reins, and so we're grateful and honored that we get to share him tonight with you. So would you help me welcome Dr. Bob Lupton and Dr. Shawn Duncan, who's going to facilitate a preliminary conversation with us tonight. So we're going to use this mic for Bob to speak with. Shawn's going to project, and then, basically, he's a soccer guy, huge Atlanta United fan, so it just comes natural for him.
You guys want to chant with me?
You don't have to love us, but you just have to appreciate the fact that we rule.
Yeah, that's a strong eye roll.
Yeah, no.
Morning, AC fan. I'm sorry, we have a cup, so.
It's okay. Just remember, right?
Oh, I'm not saying we're good this year.
We don't even enter into the argument. We just let it stand. So then what we'll do is in Q&A, I'll walk around with Mike. We'll invite Bob to stand and interact with us. Yeah?
All right. Well played, Bob. He likes to pretend he can't hear you if you ask the question. It saves a little. It pushes a little too hard. He's like, I practice. So some of you may or may not know this, but
but God had other plans. There were a lot of kids that got drafted that came from low-income, disadvantaged areas. And the drugs were real cheap and real pure over there, and so a lot of kids got strung out. I ended up in a program to help them with this amnesty program get straightened out before they came home to the States. High school GED tests and even some college courses for those young GIs. God used that experience to ignite within me started a program with the juvenile court here, worked with kids on probation. And one thing led to another. Those kids had families and difficulties at home, and those moms trying as hard as they could to keep their kids straight were overwhelmed by some of the pressures in the environment, and so it was a sense of calling to move into the community where most of those kids came from, and work from within that community to try to affect change, transformation. So that got me into it, and one thing has led to another, and it's been a lifetime journey.
So FCS, as you guys know, today stands for Focused Community Strategies. But fun fact, it's not always stood for that. Bob, what did it stand for initially, and why was there a change?
It was Family Consultation Service. I'm a psychologist by training, and so that's what I described what we were doing, consulting with families. Over time, as we became more involved in transforming neighborhoods, that didn't describe us as well as it wasn't a good description anymore. And so we had some young leaders. They always have ideas, and they said, let's keep FCS, but a more descriptive title would be Focused Community Strategies. That's what we're about, and so we are.
Yeah. So this morning, most of the folks that are here joined us, and we talked some about this crisis versus chronic work. We talked about the move from relief to development. And one of the things we've observed is people have heard your call away from relief to development, but will often kind of only leave it on the individual scale, relieving an individual's needs to developing an individual person. But you've talked about this before. It's more than just moving from relief to development. It's about moving from individuals to community. So walk us through that a little bit and talk about why that move to community is so important.
You've heard the old adage, feed a man a fish, eats for a day, teach him to fish, eats for a lifetime. On an individual level, feeding a fish is food pantry. Teaching folks to fish is some fishing skills that enable them to become self-sustaining. That's a very individual approach. You teach a bunch of folks to fish, though, and they go down and they fish the pond, and eventually the pond becomes, they fish it out. And so now it becomes a community issue. How in the world are we going to restock the pond for our trained fisher people? That moves it to a community level. We need to go to a foundation, get a grant to restock the pond, and a foundation likes what we're doing. They give us the money, but over time that gets depleted again, and so we have to go back for another grant. Eventually, the foundations are saying, we're not going to keep supporting you because you're becoming dependent on us. I need to figure out a way for this to be self-sustaining. And so we get a loan to buy the pond. And now we have control of the pond, which means we can charge the fishermen for so much a pound. It creates some money. We can set up a cannery. We can ship these fish all over the place. So it moves from helping individuals into creating healthy communities that are self-sustaining. That's a fishing analogy for what is going on in this community. Still work with individuals, but we're much more into teaching folk to fish, encouraging the entrepreneurs. That's one of the programs you'll hear about. And then how does that impact in a positive way the environment that you're in? That gets you into housing, economic development, those kind of things.
So moving away from fish, you've been involved in Nicaragua for the last almost 15 years, coming up pretty soon, in moving away from teaching fish to ownership of pond, but getting away from that metaphor. How has that move away from individual relief to community development played out in your work in Nicaragua?
We had a board chairman who really liked our philosophy, our way of doing ministry. And there was an organization called Opportunity International that came to town. They were raising money, invited him to come, and he asked them if they did community development. And they said, well, we do micro loans. And he said, yeah, that's not community development. It should be, but it prompted a discussion, and we said, let's fly up to Chicago, meet with their folks, have a day of discussion about what's the difference between micro-lending and community economic development. What came out of that was a 5-year commitment to do a kind of a trial run of combining micro-lending, that platform, and superimposing upon it a community economic development platform. Micro-lending is small loans to individuals. Community economic development is working with the entire community so that the community becomes strengthened economically and otherwise in the process. So we made that commitment. We said, let's try it out. They picked Nicaragua. We picked the community developer, and started experimenting with how to do economic development. Our kind of grocery store. Our community developer, she moved in with her teenage daughter. That's one of the principals, living among the people. And she saw everybody growing this yucca, but there's a lot of uncultivated ground. And she said, why don't you grow more? And they said, we can't eat more. And she said, yeah, but why don't you sell it? And they said, well, when you pull it out of the ground, it'll wither up in about 2 days, and then it's worthless. And we can't get it to market up in the capital in that short period of time. And she's an American now. She's seen this stuff in a grocery store. She said it didn't wither up in 2 days. So she did her investigation, found out that what they do is they dip it in paraffin, and that gives it a 2-month shelf life. It's a wax coating on it. So she came back and told her neighbors, that's what they're doing. You want to see, put a dipping operation together, see how that would work? And so they did. There were about a dozen farmers that said, yeah, let's do that. So they bought a little vat and a propane tank, and got a bunch of wax and waxed some yucca. And Geraldine made a connection to get this up the farmer's market, and by golly, that stuff sold well. And the word got out, and that dozen farmers turned into 40 farmers. Well, that meant that we had to have somebody who could bring this operation to scale, that knew something about farming and the business. And so we hired a young guy from Alabama who spoke Spanish, who was making good money in New York City. He was leading the cause, and he came down there and has turned that little dipping business into one of the larger businesses in Nicaragua. They are now shipping yucca all over the Western Hemisphere. They also discovered what you can't see very well there is when they pull those tubers up out of the ground, there's about 2/3 of them that are small or twisted, and they're not marketable. And so they're throwing away 2/3 of what they're pulling out of the ground. It's not marketable. Well, this kid is thinking, that's the same stuff that the big tubes are made out of. And he said, there's gotta be a purpose, a use for that. So he did his research and found out that there's a market for yucca flour. And he said, if we tweak our processing plant a little bit, we can make yucca flour. And so, come to find out, yucca flour is worth every bit as much as the dipped yucca. Well, then in the process, this has just happened this past year, in the process of making this yucca flour, which is used in all kinds of stuff, we found out that it's gluten-free. Now there's an international market for gluten-free yucca flour that is edible for humans. It's got to be at that level of quality. And so we got about 300 farmers right now that are doing exceedingly well, getting into this new hot market.
What has the increased economic capacity of these farmers done to the communities in which they live? So this hasn't just benefited some individual farmers. How has this impacted their families and the communities that they're living in?
It means that they can afford to send their kids to school, starting at school. Parents have to pay a percentage. It means if you're driving through the country, it means that they're driving pickup trucks instead of horses. You look at the houses that they're living in, they've got tin roofs instead of thatched roofs. You look at the roads, the dirt roads that go up to their villages, roads are paved. And so you see signs of increased prosperity that's growing up out of the soil and out of the culture.
So going back in time, for your own story, when did you first realize that the work you were doing at that kind of individual level was never going to be enough to make the difference that you were hoping for?
Well, it became apparent to me that the programs that we were running were just really not going to impact the community. I mean, it helped individuals for sure, but not transform the community. And we eventually figured out you just can't serve a community out of poverty. It has to be developed out of poverty. And that the programs are not the basic building blocks of community, of neighborhood. Neighbors are the basic building blocks of neighborhood. And so we said we've got to help re-neighbor these communities, and we were focused pretty much on one. It was a thriving community, and then all kinds of things happened in the 50s and 60s, and it became a very rough place. But we said if we're going to be part of the revitalization of this community, we have to live in the community. And that was an insight that I didn't want to share with my wife. Matter of fact, I didn't share it with her until way too long. We were in the process of building her new green farm, a little farther out of the city. And I finally, it came out one night, we were about 5 weeks away from moving into our new home. And she just wanted to talk. And I said, I don't think you want to talk to me tonight. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, I don't think we're supposed to be moving farther out of the city. I think we're supposed to be moving into the city. And that was a bad night. But the short story is that we got out of the contract for a new home, kind of miraculous, and built a new house in an adjacent community where there had not been new construction for probably 70 years. And so she got her new home, it just wasn't in the same location. But that became, that was a huge change that took place in the way we were doing ministry as neighbors. We started seeing things that we just hadn't seen before. And I think I probably told folks about our first Christmas in the city, or at least in the book. That, you know, we set up this program, Adopt a Family program, Christmas time. And we would identify the kids that we're not going to get anything for Christmas, and give those names to caring people from around the city. And then on Christmas Eve, they would deliver those toys to the homes of these children. A lot of excitement generated. But the first Christmas that we were living in the neighborhood, that was the first time I really was hanging around in the neighborhood. I was in the homes of some of the families that, when the gift-bearing families arrived, and that's when I saw something very disturbing. The kids, of course, were all excited. The moms were gracious, a little reserved, maybe a little embarrassed. But if there was a dad in the household, he just disappeared. He was going out the back door. And it dawned on me what was happening was that these parents were being exposed in front of their kids for their inability to provide. And the moms would endure that indignity for the sake of the kids, but it was just more than the father's sense of dignity could handle. It was like his impotence was being exposed in front of his wife and kids. And it was killing him. That's the first time I saw that. And I realized, as good a program as I thought this was, this has got a real downside. This is hurting some folks. And so I said, we got to change this. So the following year, when folks started calling in for their adopted family, I said, would you give an extra gift this year? Would you give the gift of dignity to the dads? And here's how you do it. Go shopping, buy the toys, don't wrap them. Bring them down and we'll set up, we'll call it the old toy shop. We'll set up a little storefront and we'll put somewhere between a yard sale and a wholesale price on those toys. And we'll invite parents to come in and go shopping. And then they'll have the joy of purchasing toys that they know would delight their kids, rather than having someone else purchase and give those toys. There will be dignity in the process of exchange. We changed the name, call it Pride for Parents, and it changed everything. What we found out was everybody loves to find a bargain. It's a universal value. They just we love bargains. And I thought, now, is it really doing our low-income neighbors a favor by setting up a system that excludes them from the joy and the excitement of purchasing? And so that's where, for us, the exchange system became very important, that everybody has something to bring to the table, and nobody is so poor that they have nothing to contribute. And so we said it becomes the responsibility of those of us who are
work here. One of the challenges of introducing you all to this work we recognize is it's over 40 years of maturation of work, and it's 18 years in one place. So sometimes the experience can be, wow, that's really big. There's no way I can get from where I am to something like that. So maybe help folks out by telling them maybe one of your first stories of trying to get into housing or economic development. Did it look this polished and like professional, or how did it start out for you when you decided community development's the way to go, we're going to hop into housing now?
Well, community development was not on my mind. I really didn't know what community development was. We moved into the neighborhood to be rightly related to those we were serving. And so we thought, we can be a help here. Put our kids in a local school, we can be involved. But one of the first things that happened First of all, our parents, both sets of houses that were being fixed up. A lot of the big old houses had, they were carved up into little rooms and apartments. And so they were rental. I noticed that a couple of those houses sold, and a couple of young professionals were fixing them up, and I said, wow, this is great news. And then a developer bought about 4 contiguous lots right behind our house and built 4 really nice, kind of upscale homes there. And so we were thrilled because our property value was definitely going up. But at the same time, we started hearing requests from folks that were part of a little prayer group, a little fellowship group. Please pray for us. Our rents have just doubled. Please pray for us. They're selling the house that we've been renting. And so we had to scurry around to try to find other places for folk to live. Then I remember the neighbor across the street, Opal Guerin was her name. Opal came in one morning to our little prayer group, and she was weeping, and she said, I just got the news, the landlord has given me 30 days to get out. She said the city told him to fix it up and board it up, and he's not going to fix it up, he's going to hold on to it till property values go up. And she had 30 days. Well, that was the first time it connected with me. I'm Opal's problem. As my property value is going up, I'm drawing up with it the values of other properties. The rent that everybody, the rent increases that everybody's experiencing. I'm causing that problem. And as my wealth is nicely appreciating, their poverty is deepening in inverse proportion. And when it became that clear, I just couldn't sit there and pray. I got on the phone, started calling folks, and following week we had a dozen or so folks from different churches around the city come down. I introduced them to Opal, and I said, we got a problem, and I don't know what to do about this problem. We hadn't even heard the word gentrification yet. I just knew we had a problem that was hurting the very folks that we were there to serve them. And so that group went through Opal's house, and it was in really bad shape. The bare wires hanging out of the wall. Her commode, I remember, was hanging crooked in the bathroom. The floor joists underneath had rotted out. But at least it was affordable, right? And so they said, well, maybe we ought to try to buy it. And so they authorized me to go ahead and see if I could negotiate a deal. I did. We bought it for $20,000, and then gave Opal the good news. You don't have to move out. We're now your landlord. And it was wonderful news for her. But what it meant for us was we had now become slumlords. And we inherited a house that had dozens of code violations. And we didn't have any money to fix it up. And so that group of a dozen folks had at least that many networks. And they started converging on Opal's house, and over about a 6-month period, totally remodeled it. Got rid of all the rotten wood, fixed the siding, did a new roof, all new systems. And in 6 months, that house looked like it did in the 1930s. It was just a beautiful house. And so we had a gathering in the church. Opal came in. We signed over into her name the title to that property. Sold it to her for what we had in it. It was a total of $24,000. Didn't have to borrow any money, so we didn't have to charge her any interest. So her house payment was about half what her rent had been. And now as my property value goes up, Opal's property value is going up. That group had swelled from a dozen to about 150 folks that had some hand in that house. And they said, "Do you have other opals in your church, in your community?" And I said, "Wow, yeah, we sure do." And so that started us down the road to housing that we had no intention of being involved in, had no capacity to develop housing. But we knew that we had to do something about it, or it was going to harm our neighbors rather than help. Well, that has grown into a housing ministry that has provided affordable homes for hundreds of people. So, no intention of getting involved in housing, but no telling where the visions come from when you're planted in the midst of need as well as kingdom opportunity.
So, a lot of leaders here, if they're contemplating being a leader of a nonprofit that guides some good programs in a community, if they're considering being now leading work that's community development based, what would be some of your advice to them as a leader who led programs and then was leading an organization that's doing development work? Like, what are some pieces of advice that they would need?
That's a kind of a big step for a lot of folks. That certainly was a big step for us. But there's no better way to identify with the people of a community than becoming a neighbor. One of the difficulties that we realized in a community like this used to be a thriving racially mixed, income mixed community in its heyday. But when the General Motors plant closed, when the college moved over to the west side, those were two major anchors that left the community. The community started in a decline that lasted for more than 50 years. And over that period of time, the community deteriorated and became exceedingly dangerous. And nothing that the remaining residents, homeowners had in terms of their capacity, there was not enough energy or connections or money to turn around that relentless slide. And so what happened was that the community hemorrhaged, continued to move out, to leave, until what you have are the domain of drug dealers and slumlords. And in this building, a liquor store. So just bringing programs in is, as good as that is, and programs are helpful, they're essential but not sufficient. I was talking with a guy about my age, maybe a little younger, who had taken early retirement. He wanted to make a difference in the world, and so he identified the neighborhood in his city that was most troubled. And he had spent, he was in my office some months ago. He had spent about 6 years developing programs in this community, and had some great programs. He was most proud of their educational program. He said, "Kids, our graduation rate is going up. A bunch of our kids now are going to college," and so he was thrilled about the quality of programs that they had. But he said, the community doesn't seem to be getting any better. And there's still a lot of drugs. And he said, "This doesn't seem to be improving." And I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "Yeah, programs are important, but they just don't move communities out of poverty. In order for a community to grow out of poverty, it has to attract and sustain leadership. And the leaders have been leaving this community for as long as anybody can remember. And I said, let me ask you about your educational program. I said, get kids in college. How many of those kids are coming back into the neighborhood? None of them. That was their ticket out of the neighborhood. Education, the ticket out of this neighborhood. So that's wonderful for that kid and their family, and in the process, the neighborhood poverty deepens. And so in a strange kind of inverse economy, great programs work to the demise of a neighborhood. Isn't that strange? It made us believe, as important as our programs were, they were not an infusion of new blood. It's been hemorrhaging for years. The best and the brightest have been leaving. And the community needs an infusion of new blood. And so we changed our strategy. Initially, I was helping families get out of the community, helping them to find better housing in better neighborhoods, helping them get out of the projects, which seemed like a good strategy until we moved in, and then I realized for every success, this community is getting poorer. And so we need to find a way to create an infusion of new blood. We have a word for that now. It's called gentrification. And depends on who's using it, whether it's a good word or bad word. Social service folks, maybe folks like us, see the negatives of gentrification, the displacement of folks. That rents are raised, now they're pushed out of the community. We've seen the negatives. What we need, what we advocate, is gentrification with justice. We need the infusion of new blood, but not at the expense of the poor, of the longtime residents. They need to be the beneficiaries of a reviving community, not the victims of a reviving community. When the gentry moves in, things change. Quality of education goes up. Streets become safer because they know the city council person, chief of police, they've got connections. When we moved into the neighborhood, which was adjacent neighborhood here, there were no grocery stores in the neighborhood. The first week we were there, my wife sent me across the street to a little corner grocery store for a gallon of milk. I came back and gave her change of a few pennies, and she says, "Where's the rest of it?" And I said, "That's it." She said, "You're kidding." She marched over to that store, and she came back and said, "We will never buy anything there again. The milk there is almost twice what I pay at the supermarket." Now we see a steady stream of our neighbors going down buying their groceries at 2 prices for inferior quality. That ain't right. And so that's in our face. It's not theoretical anymore. That's in our face. We see that happening to our neighbors. So I'm a connected guy, right? That's one of the advantages of gentry, connected. And there's a guy in my suburban church who is the vice president of a supermarket chain. And so I call him, we get together, and I said, "We need a supermarket in this neighborhood." And he said, "We'll do a study. I'll get back to you." We did. And he came back and said, your community will not sustain one of our grocery stores. And I said, "No, wait a second. The density in our community is a whole lot greater than the density in the suburbs where you're putting your new stores." And I said, "As far as I know, everybody has to eat." And he said, "You really don't understand our business, do you?" I said, "I think you're in the food business." I said, "No." He said, "We don't make our money on food." He said, "The margins on food are like 2%. He said, "We make all our money in all those non-food stamp items." cosmetics, the toiletries. He said, that's where all the profit margins are. He said, you don't have enough disposable income. That's money left over after necessity. You don't have enough disposable income in this neighborhood to justify a store. And I said, so what do I do to get you guys in here? He said, well, you gotta get your disposable income up. Talking to a social work type here, right? How am I gonna get disposable income up? Well, now in that neighborhood that has really gentrified, there are two supermarkets that are competing with each other for their market share of the disposable income that's come into the community. If we can just enable our neighbors, our low-income neighbors to remain in the community, that's how we get into housing, they become the beneficiaries of the best food value in the country, the world perhaps. And so we pay less for our high-quality groceries than anybody in the world. If we can just share that benefit with our low-income neighbors, that's justice. So we're saying if we can do gentrification with justice, it benefits everybody. The quality of education goes up, safety in the street go up, price of groceries comes down, everybody benefits from quality of housing going up. That's gentrification with justice. What do you think?
I think we're going to turn the mic over to these guys and see what they have to say to you. And you can pretend not to hear them if you want to. But if you want to stand, and Donnell will walk the microphone around. If you're asking a question, speak into the mic, so he has no excuse to not hear you. So that's.
I wasn't hardly used to that.
You're welcome to stay seated and walk around.
Okay, good. Good.
First question.
Take your best shot.
Okay, so we're trying to mirror some of the programs that you guys kind of run. So we have placed a small grocery in the neighborhood and a farmer's market. So what would be your best advice to get over some of the challenges we have by trying to get people to change their way of shopping and just, I grew up eating McDonald's.
Do you
It's hard
have
for
a
me to stop
supermarket
eating
in your community? You
We
have
have a small grocery.
A
They're
small grocery.
meats and
Have you been to this one here?
Yeah.
Small, is it similar, a little bigger?
a little bit small.
Yeah. Well, that's why we started that grocery store. We did have our clothing, our thrift store in there. But we got to realizing, clothes are not the biggest need in this community. Matter of fact, St. Vincent's de Paul down the street has a clothes spot. We'll give them our clothes, but what is really needed is good grocery, particularly that have fresh fruits and vegetables. Well, what we found out was, you can't run a grocery store profitably, in the city unless, your highest profit, items, unless you have beer, cigarettes, and lotto tickets. And we didn't want any of those. So how in the world do we get fresh fruits and vegetables? Fresh fruits and vegetables are expensive to deal with. A lot of spoilage, you gotta keep them turning. So we went to a foundation and we said, we think there's a real need for fresh fruits and vegetables. Our customers are telling us that. Would you guys want to do an experiment with us and subsidize? We'll bring in fresh fruits and vegetables, and we'll have them here on Tuesdays. And if you'll subsidize that, we'll give our neighbors, anybody that comes in with a SNAP card, 2 for 1 for any fresh fruits and vegetables that they want to purchase. So they can double their value if they come in on Tuesday.
All right, guys, I had to duck out a little bit early, but again, you're here at the FCS Open
Open House live. Tune in tomorrow at 9:30, and we're going to go on the tour, and leave a comment to let us know what you'd love to see tomorrow, or visit our website, fcsministries.org. All right, have a good night. See you tomorrow.